Most of the time, we assume that whether something can be done is determined by need. If something is needed, if it's available, if you know how to use it, then logically, you should be able to use it. So the structure feels like need to access to use. But in reality, a lot of situations don't work like that. You'll notice that you can't act directly. Instead, you have to go through a specific person, obtain a document, follow a procedure, or be in an approved setting. Only then can the action actually happen. At that point, the constraint is no longer the object itself, it's the path. So the question shifts from what is needed to have you followed the correct route? That shift is exactly what this model is about. Core idea. Legitimacy-Routed Access describes a condition where access is no longer determined directly by need, but by whether a recognized path has been completed. In other words, it's not just about whether something is necessary, it's about whether it has been made valid through the correct structure. How this happens. In a simple system, things look like this: need to access to use. But under legitimacy routing, it becomes need to legitimacy gate, authorization, listing, credential, to conditional access to use. So something gets inserted in the middle, a legitimacy layer. And once that layer exists, it stops being optional. It becomes required. A common form, positive lists. One very common way this shows up is through positive list systems, which means if something is listed, then it can be used. If it's not listed, then it's effectively inaccessible. So instead of asking, can this be done? The system asks, has this already been recognized in advance? This shifts control away from real-time expertise and toward pre-approved categories. Another key mechanism, professional gates. Then there's the role of professionals. When a specific role becomes a required checkpoint, a gate is formed. For example, you cannot proceed directly. You must go through a licensed person. At that point, that person is no longer just an advisor. They become the entry point. This leads to reduced direct access, increased concentration of authority, redefined professional boundaries, new dependency chains. Access is no longer between you and the object. It is between you and the gate. What this produces. First, need no longer guarantees access. You can need something urgently, but without completing the route, you still cannot act. Second, delay appears. If the process is slower than the situation, friction emerges. So you get urgent need to slow procedure to delay. This delay is not accidental. It is structurally produced. Third, boundaries shift. Once a route is installed, new roles become necessary. People or institutions that were not previously involved now become part of the system. Fourth, markets adapt. Markets don't wait for systems to stabilize. They reorganize immediately around the valid path. So you start to see co-located services, hybrid structures, outsourced authorization, adjacent professional roles. The system doesn't just regulate behavior, it reshapes how things are built. Fifth, necessity itself changes meaning. Originally, necessity comes from the situation, but now necessity must be recognized to count. So you get actual need is not the same as recognized need. Only recognized need becomes actionable. What this model changes. This model changes how you analyze situations. Instead of asking, what is needed, you ask, through which path can this need be made valid? Instead of, is this allowed, you ask, under what conditions does it become allowed? So many conflicts that look like disagreements about the object are actually conflicts about who controls the path. Closing. So in its simplest form, what used to be need to action becomes need to route to action. And once that route exists, who controls it, how it is structured, who must pass through it, all begin to reorganize the system. At that point, outcomes are no longer determined by need alone. They are determined by which paths are recognized as valid. Naming, declaration. Within meta-writing ecology, legitimacy-rooted access is defined as a structural model that describes how access is reorganized when legitimacy becomes an operative pathway rather than a background condition. In this model, legitimacy refers to the structure that makes something recognized, valid, and acceptable within an institutional or professional system. Rooted means you cannot act directly. You must pass through specific steps, roles, or conditions. Access refers to the ability to obtain, use, administer, or legally perform something. This model does not evaluate whether the system is justified or not. It describes a structural shift. When legitimacy becomes a required path, access stops following need directly. It follows the route that has been made valid.